Hello, once again, my ESL History IB students. We are going to continue our discussion of authoritarian states in unit or chapter 4.3 about the aims and results of Nazi policies. This is video number two. There will be a video number three. Just looking over the material before I got started here today. Yeah, there's, again, I've given myself a timer on my phone, so it's not a hugely long video, but I don't think I'm going to be able to cover the rest. So there'll be a third video. Okay, let's just jump in. How's the hair doing? The hair's doing okay. All right, so we're on page 214, and we're talking now uh, about youth and education policies. So again, this is the section of the chapter where we're looking at what did Hitler do domestically inside Germany from 1933 to the end of the war in 1945. Okay. And what were his goals? What were the results of some of those policies? And what were his policies for young people in Germany? And of course, we're talking about, young Aryan race, master race Germans in his mind, and education. Okay, so they mentioned first of all, I think you've heard the word Third Reich. Okay, we've talked about that in class, REICH. Okay, this is the Third Empire, the Third German Empire that he's trying to create. And they put in quotes here the thousand-year Reich. So he has, ideas that this thing he's setting in motion, this German Empire, is going to last 1,000 years. Okay, so that's what they're talking about. Envisaged is an English word that means like you thought of it, you imagined it into being. Okay. So they're saying that in order to have a Reich, an empire that lasts beyond his life and maybe the life of the next generation, the young people have to be taught Nazi ideas, have to be taught Nazi policies, so they incorporate them into their lives and perpetrate, perpetuate. There's a big English word. Keep it going, keep the idea going after Hitler is gone. Now, he's not saying obviously he's going to die in 1945. He doesn't foresee that, but he's going to die sometime. He knows that. Okay. So they have to be committed, as the book says, to the worldview of the Nazi movement. Okay, youth uh, was to act as a standard bearer of NSDAP. Remember, NSDAP just is another way of saying Nazi vision of the future. The conditioning of youth at the top of 215 in school and through extracurricular activities and organizations was a regime priority. Okay, so not too, surprising. They wanted to indoctrinate, they wanted to get kids into the mode of believing what the Nazis are saying, accepting Nazi ideas, right from when they start elementary and junior high school into their adulthood. And they're going to do this not only in school, but also through extracurricular activities. So they're going to do it through the clubs that they would participate in after school and at the weekends, etc. Okay. So I think that, again, I'm always trying to point out places where you can parallel what's happening in Germany with what either happened in Cuba with Castro or in China with Mao, as the other two guys were studying. So in this case, this blue quote on 215, I think ties well with what's going to happen in China with something that Mao does with the youth called the Red Guard. Okay, and this is part of the Cultural Revolution in China in the 1960s. We'll get to that. You don't need to know it now, but maybe just out in the margin of your book, write, next to this quote, similar to the Red Guard. Okay, and the quote is, when an opponent says, I will not come over to your side, I calmly say, your children belong to us already. You will pass on. You will die eventually. Now it's like a Nazi is talking to somebody that doesn't support the Nazi, another adult. Your descendants, however, the people that come after you, your children and your grandchildren, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing but this new community. So that's a little chilling, right? So what the person Hitler said this. This is a Hitler quote in November of 33. And I guess what he's responding to is people that maybe criticized the Nazis for some of maybe their more extreme views and said, "Look, I'm not going to support you. I'm not going to follow you." And he's like, "I don't care because I've already got your children. I'm going to get them, and they're going to grow up in this society where my ideas, the Nazi ideas, are the only ideas, and and everybody, that comes from your children and your grandchildren are going to believe in what I believe in." So that's a very hard thing to say to an opponent, but it was true, right? If you know, even if maybe they hadn't started World War II and he had locked in, kind of like Castro does in Cuba or Franco did in Spain after the Spanish Civil War. Um, you know, he obviously dies and the Nazi ideas, I can't say died with him. That's certainly Germany had to go through a period after World War II where they reassessed how they allowed themselves to be controlled by a man like Hitler. And now, fascism is very much uh, outlawed in Germany. But that's not to say that there's not people in Germany, like in every place in the world, who are fascist or racist or have bad ideas. Uh, you can't stop that from happening. You can just maybe hope that it doesn't gain power, right? Okay. So it says here the Nazi state made strenuous, strong efforts to um, take over education and the belief system that the young people of Germany were going to believe in. So there's a big German word here on the next part under the education system, just as Gleichschlangentung, and I'm mispronouncing these German words very badly. Um, that was part of politics and religious life. And that word means standardization, kind of like making everything the same in that realm, politics, religion, now education, but more so Nazification, making everything in those realms follow the Nazi idea. Okay. So the Nazis sought to Nazify the school system. In April of 34, they get a new guy, a high-ranking Nazi, put in charge of science, education, and culture, and his job is to get schools. Sorry, I got something in my nose. It's itching. Go, man. Um, get schools to be on board with teaching, Nazi ideas and not contradicting, not going against anything the Nazis believed in. Okay, so of course, one of the first things you do, just as he did with the civil service, is you purge, you kick out anybody that's not loyal, that's not a loyal Nazi. So, of course, anybody, any professor at any university or school that was a Jehovah's Witness, a Jew, maybe not a natural born German, and of course, if you were a communist or some other party before you could only vote for the Nazis, you would have been kicked out. You had to join a teachers union, which is the NSLB. And if you wanted to get a job, you had to join this union. Okay. So that meant that, you were going to pledge allegiance to Hitler and, the Nazi party. And of course, probably have to sign documents that say you will not, deviate from this education curriculum or something like that. Okay. So they were under party control, the schools. Primary, of course, you guys know that means elementary school through to tertiary education. That's all the way up through secondary is high school, tertiary is university and college, right? Okay. Um, In schools, curriculum changes placed emphasis on sports, biology, history, and Germanics. So when I have time in class and we go over this page, sorry, quick drink. I often ask the students, well, why those four things? And so maybe if you want to pause the video and think for a moment, why would Hitler, math is not on there. Uh, you know, even the German language, I guess that might fall under Germanics, etc. There's other things that aren't on there. Chemistry's not on there. Okay. But he those were the four things they chose to emphasize. And there's a reason and there's a logic to that. Um, and so, you know, just in a nutshell, without going, sports, he wants healthy young people. And why does he want healthy young people? Because he knows there could be a war coming and he's going to need healthy soldiers and people able to, pull their own weight, even if you're stay on the home front and you're not a soldier on the front lines. So he wants you're capable of physical contribution to the nation. And the quote continues, whether in the field of reproduction, meaning women having babies, or military service. So if you're a woman, you have to have more babies, so I have more soldiers. And if you're a man, you have to go and carry a gun and fight for Germany. And that's really the way he thought. He it was very black and white to him. How do you, as a German citizen, serve the state? Okay, these are the two things, it was very binary in a way to him. Teaching of history, of course, is all about, the approved history of Germany's greatness, the first two Reichs, the first two empires, and now his ascendancy and rise and the coming of the new Third Reich, okay, to get rid of the Weimar Republic and the evil TOV, the dangers of Bolshevism, and so you can understand why he wanted history taught. Okay. Um, okay. So what they're saying is that even during the Weimar Republic, from say in the 20s and in the early 30s, history was already uh, kind of very nationalistic because the teachers that were becoming teachers and learning in the 19, say, 10s and then during World War One were very swept up in what Kaiser Wilhelm and make Germany in the war, and so they had come to adulthood in a country that was already very nationalistic, and so the the teaching of history was already about like how great Germany is maybe, and then Hitler just added telling his story and the story of the Nazi Party and stuff to that mix. Okay. Okay, so that's good. We're flipping to 216. Biology. Okay. And so here's our word eugenics. I think we've talked about this word before. The science of improving a population through controlled breeding. So they very much, he wanted a master race. He didn't want anybody marrying any other races. And of course, if you couldn't, you definitely couldn't marry a Jewish person, even though that's not another race. That's another religion. But um, yeah, so this idea of eugenics, if you don't know a lot about that, just Wikipedia it and just read the, introduction paragraph. It'll explain what it is. So biology important to him. Natural selection, the whole idea of Darwin, the, the what is it? The survival of the fittest, right? The idea that the strong will inherit the earth, not the meek and weak, as the Bible says, and the elimination of inferiors. Okay. Uh, so there's this new foundation of racial science, this book written in 1934, um, race science. So they would have taught things and made them sound authentic and scientific, but really they're there are these made up things that they would have passed off as science without actual, evidence to support it. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. And you can read the other things in there. Okay. And then lastly, the fourth thing, Germanics, included the study of language and literature with the aim of proving the superiority of Germans as a culture producing race. Okay, so basically they would have exalted German composers. We talked about Wagner, Richard Wagner. The dun 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 dun. The whole Ring of the Niebling thing, um, and German artists, painters, writers, etc. Because Germany is great and we make great culture. Okay. Uh, and of course, it would have meant a rejection of any works considered hostile in spirit or message to the Nazis. So if you tried to have a book published or a play made or a movie or anything and it wasn't totally, in support of the Nazis in some way, it probably wasn't getting published or made or watched. Okay. Mm, Okay. So basically, if you were in school during all that time, it was a lot of propaganda-esque education coming your way with a huge emphasis on, uh, it says here, the Obervater, the Supreme Father Adolf Hitler. Okay, youth groups. So again, in school, you're getting bombarded. Outside of school, you're getting bombarded. Outside the formal institutions of education, the regime attempted to encourage conformity and apply techniques of indoctrination by establishing youth groups. Okay, so I think you know what conformity means, to conform, to be the same. Indoctrination, we've said that word a bunch. If you don't know that word, right there on 216, make sure you look it up. It's a good word to know to be able to use in an essay. Um, Absent from the description as any reference to intellectualism or academic excellence. So it's like they didn't care if you were super smart or you got really good grades. It was, are you starting to show the characteristics of a good Nazi? Are you good at sports? Are you fit and healthy? That meant more to them than, being really brainy. Okay. Um, it says, I will have no intellectual training. Knowledge is ruin to my young men, asserted Hitler, who educated such intellectualism with the cultural decadence which he claimed intellectuals had inflicted on Germany in the Weimar years. He doesn't want anybody thinking too much because if you think too much, or you possibly know too much about the rest of the world outside of Germany, you might start to question what Hitler's doing or why he's doing it. And he doesn't want that, right? He just wants people to say yes and do what they're told. Okay. Over here in the TOK discussion, I like this box about subliminal messages and things like that. Examples of like questions in a math textbook that were totally like, you know, had hidden meanings in them. Well, not even that subtle. Um, so I'd like to talk about that, but I don't have time right now. But read that and definitely ask me questions. I think it is an interesting idea over there. Okay, so now we're over on 217. Um, and of course, the most famous group uh, that a lot of people have heard of, even if they don't know as much about the Nazis as you will know when you finish studying all this, is the Hitler Youth. Okay, so the Hitler Jugend, the HJ, the Hitler Youth for boys. So that was a kind of like the Boy Scouts, um, only boys. And then they had a separate group called the BDM, the Bund Deutscher Model, the League of German Maidens for girls. Okay. So they had they got rid of any other kind of club or activity that you could do except this and ones affiliated with the Catholic Church. Because Hitler had signed an agreement, if you remember when we talked about that, called the Concordat, where he said, okay, church, you don't go up on Sunday in your sermon and say anything bad about the Nazis, and we won't get involved in your church, and that will include your schools and your youth groups. So you could still belong to like a Catholic Sunday school or a Catholic youth group. And maybe you did both. I don't know. Uh, but everybody else, if you were in some kind of other league or fun group or whatever, it all got absorbed into the Hitler Youth. Okay. By 1935, the Nazi youth movement accounted for approximately 60% of young Germans. But everybody was encouraged to join. And on December 1936, all young Germans were expected to join. If you were a school teacher, you were supposed to promote membership in these groups. Um, Mainly, it was 14 to 18-year-olds, so teenagers, obviously, again, Hitler is trying to get the next group of soldiers ready. Um, but they expanded it down to 10 to 14-year-olds had a group, and then the 14 to 18 had a group, and they had different names for those. You don't have to remember all that. Just know that they were basically from 10 years old until you graduated high school, you were in one of these groups. And then in March of 1939, the year the war starts, membership became compulsory. So if you were a young German person, you had to join one of these groups. Um, okay. But it wasn't like the boys and the girls didn't want to do it because it had a lot of privileges. There was a variety of activities. Boys would go, like I said, the Boy Scouts, camping and hiking, sports, music, concerts, attendance at rallies, military training provided via specialized air and naval sections. So getting young boys interested in becoming pilots or working on airplanes, interested in boats or wanting to become a sailor or work in the Navy. Um, so all of this, like I said, if you've seen Jojo Rabbit, that movie, they kind of have some fun with this idea. And that's all I'll say. You definitely should see that movie if you haven't seen it. I think one person has seen it in class, right? Because you did it for your report. But maybe some of you have seen it as well. For girls, though, what did they learn? Well, physical fitness. So they would, do exercises and jog and, run around and be physically fit. But it was a lot of domestic science, which is a kind way of saying, learning how to sew, learning how to cook, learning how to take care of a baby, learning all those kind of things that you need to know to be a wife and a mother. Preparation for marriage and childbearing. Okay. Let's see. The interesting thing that I like on this page is this next part. Okay. And it says basically, if you were, say you're 14, okay, which in our system is junior high school. Most of the world, it's kind of the time before high school. You would have been so busy with just going to school and then doing this club probably every day after school and on some of the weekends that really parents, the role of the parent and the influence the parents had on the lives of their children started to shrink because they were seeing their teachers and these club leaders more than they were their parents. Parents became reduced to a bed and breakfast service. That's an interesting way of putting it. And parental control over their children weakened in many cases. Okay. And if you were an adult who had grown up obviously before the Nazis, say you're 40 years old and would that, yeah, you could be 40 and have a 14-year-old, right? You had it when you were 26. So if you're 40 years old in the 30s, you know, you're maybe even older than Hitler at that point. I forget how old he was when he became chancellor. I should look that up. But anyway, um, so you would have your own or your own ideas about Germany, about religion, and maybe things very contrary to what your children were being taught in these clubs and in the school. Not that I'm saying that you were being a bad Nazi or something. Maybe you did support Hitler and stuff, but still you would have thought, okay, I'm the dad here or I'm the mom. I should tell my children what to do and stuff. And that was starting to shrink. And maybe they would have their own ideas. Oh, mom, you like this. Well, that's not right. Hitler says this and this, and that definitely happened in China, where a lot of young children would denounce their parents for not being good communists and stuff like that. Okay, so very interesting idea there. Uh, the NSDAP, the Nazis, sought to monopolize the life of the young to wean them from parental control to party control. So they wanted parents to have less of a role and the party to have the really the say in how they acted and how they behaved in order to maximize the opportunities for indoctrination. Okay. Um, and like I said, most German people, if you were in it at the moment, without the context of what was happening in the world, because they were probably sheltered from a lot of that, they probably thought it was great. They probably thought it was a lot of fun, and it was what everybody around them was doing. They wouldn't have thought it was strange, and they probably even after the war, when they lost and they found out how terrible Hitler was, that didn't diminish the fondness they might have had for that time they spent at these camps and doing these activities with their friends. They just would have to recast all that in the like, well, why were we there? And that had to be a very complicated intellectual, emotional thing for many German people probably after the war. Uh, okay, it says the great majority of young Germans were recruited into youth organizations that, in theory, promised to tell them that democracy, Marxism, Jewish people, all of that's bad. They want to really have you be prideful of your German heritage. They wanted to tell you how evil the TOV was and help you to reverse the diktat. Those three bullets at the bottom of 217 are Nazi goals, right? Those are three things they really want to do, not only with the young people, but with everybody in Germany. Okay. And so basically, it says to sum up the education thing at the top of 218, it says what they ended up with was a huge group of young people that were very healthy and but were not very smart or well educated because the actual like, academic stuff had been pushed to the side and in favor of, saying how great Hitler was and how you should be able to run a mile in 4 minutes. Okay, the impact of policies on women. This is something we're going to study in every Castro Mao in here, and this is one of the bullets. Often there is a question about um discuss the effect of domestic policies on women in two authoritarian states. And again, in a paper two question like that, you get to choose who you write about. So if you think you know a lot about how Hitler treated women, you write about him, and then you got to pick one of the other two guys, right? Okay. So without even going into this, I think you could probably tell me, and this is what I would ask you in class if we were about to start this section on 218, is what do you think Hitler's ideas about women were? And I mean, I think we just talked about it. He thought that their role was to be wives and mothers, that they didn't need a job, that they should, take care of the house. Um, I don't know enough about I haven't really like read like a definitive biography of Hitler or anything to say that he hated women or he was a misogynist, but he certainly didn't value them as much as he did men. I don't think there were any high-ranking women in any positions of power in the German Nazi hierarchy. He did, have a girlfriend who became his wife very much at the end, Eva Braun, but he never had any children of his own. Um, but anyway, we'll talk about it as we go through. So first of all, in the box on 218, it talks about women and minorities. Okay, so we're going to talk about the impact on minorities on 220, but and that leads us into how he treated the Jews, and of course we have to talk about the Holocaust, and that could be two lessons easily. There's a lot to talk about there, but I'll have to go through it quickly, unfortunately. But that'll be video three. Okay, so let's just talk about the policies of women. So the box says that look, if you're going to talk about if the question is about minorities, how did the name two authoritarian states, how did they treat minorities? Discuss the treatment of minorities in two authoritarian states. You cannot say that women were a minority. Okay, you can't classify them as a minority. If it says women and minorities, or if it says, well, obviously, if it says women, you talk about women, but if it just says minorities, you shouldn't choose women to write about because women were not a minority. Minority is, less of the population, but in almost any population in modern history, God, I got a little bug flying around here. It's bugging me. Sorry. Um, Women are almost always about 50% of the population. And so, of course, they're not in the minority, right? Um, so the minorities that they're talking about would be religious minorities, okay? Which would be things like the Jehovah's Witness that we talked about, Jews, okay, asocials, okay, basically people that weren't able to adapt to society or, anything now in modern enlightened 2026 we know that could cause someone to be less social like learning disability, autism, anything like that. That was you were a minority in Germany, and you were treated differently. Biological outsiders, okay, this would be any children who were half this and that. You weren't pure German. Of course, if you had any kind of physical disability, I don't, it could have even extended to being like diabetic, colorblind, things that we don't even think of as really holding back your life nowadays. Who knows back then? Um, so any hereditary defect, and they were just not part of the big German word there, the Volksgemeinschaft, the racial, the pure German community. Okay? All right. So here's our famous slogan at the beginning, the KKK. And that's Kuche Kirche. And I'm probably mispronouncing those German words. I apologize, but it basically means children, kitchen, church. Okay? So that's really what Hitler thought of women. He thought they're in charge of those three realms, taking care of the kids, making sure the kids go to church and get a proper Nazi Christian upbringing, and taking care of the kitchen and preparing food and taking care of the house. Okay? So, um, yeah, they're limiting the participation of women to those three arenas. They're not supposed to be in business, they're not supposed to be in politics. I don't even think they're necessarily supposed to be in education. Although my guess is they had female teachers at like elementary schools and stuff. I doubt it was all men teachers. Okay. Uh, The world of women is a smaller world. Her husband, her family, her children, and her house. Okay. Um, and the partnership between a man and a woman, if you get married, should be in service of the nation. Okay. Very traditional roles of women as mothers, the basis of the family unit, the bearer of children. Um, Indeed, it says Germany's birth rate was, with the exception of Austria, the lowest in Europe during the Weimar years. So in the 20s into the 30s, German women were having less babies than they were in Spain or Italy. And part of that is because in Catholicism, uh, you're not supposed to use contraception. You're supposed to have lots of babies. There's no abortion. But I think Germany was a more Protestant country where you could, use contraception and women were more in control of how many babies they had. So, uh, there you go. Okay. If you were single, if you were a married couple but you had no children, if you were homosexual, for a while, I think, that was kind of not spoken of, but it wasn't, well, I mean, you could be single or childless, but I mean, there was no stigma. Stigma means like a bad feeling associated with that, and homosexuality probably just wasn't talked about, but it was tolerated. But once the Nazis came along, those three things were all of a sudden now seen as bad. Like if you were married but not having kids, they were angry at you, right? That's the whole point of getting married, right? And if you're single past whatever age, they were probably looked down on you. Why didn't you get married? Why didn't you start a family? That's your job as a good German. Okay. Um, okay. Pronatalist policies. Natal is a word that has to do with pregnancy. You probably have heard of that word before. So this is policies to encourage the growth in the birth rate. Okay. And there was some incentives, things that they offered to make you want to maybe have a baby, and disincentives, things that if to make you, how should I explain that? If you didn't have a baby, maybe this bad thing would happen to you. Okay, so like good things could happen to you if you did have a baby, and if you chose not to have a baby, bad things would happen to you. Okay. So the easiest one is, for example, is an incentive, is a monetary reward. They would give you money. Okay. And maybe it wasn't directly like putting cash in your hand, but maybe you would get a low interest loan, okay, that you could use to buy a house or buy furniture or whatever you needed for your home. And instead of maybe 5% interest on it to pay it back, you'd only get 2% or something. Married couples would receive a marriage loan of 1,000 Reichmarks to be repaid at 1% per month. Okay. And anytime you had a child, that affected the loan, and it would go down. Um, Basically, though, to get the loan, women had to say they were not working. They had to give up employment, and that left more jobs open for men to take over. So, almost a million German couples, well, not almost a million, but 700,000 couples received this kind of loan in the 30s, between 33 and 37, a third of all the marriages in that time. And then it increased to 42% from 33%. And people started to get married because you could get these monetary benefits. But the birth rate didn't go up a lot. Okay. Um, yeah. It seems like a lot of women would have one or two children, but they weren't going to have a third or a fourth because you weren't going to get a bigger house necessarily. Um, Couples preferred to have one or two children since the expense of having more would outweigh the monetary loans you were getting or the benefits. Income tax reductions, family allowance payments, maternity benefits, reduced school fees, cheap train tickets, all of this stuff for families and married people with kids. Okay. Um, and then the one that always makes students kind of smile, and it's like this kind of funny thing, is the regime introduced the Mother's Cross. Okay. And this is a medal like you would hang around your neck. Gold for women who had given birth to eight or more children. That's a lot of kids. It's very rare, I think, for you to meet any of your classmates where they have seven brothers and sisters. I've taught one student in my 10 years at ASU who had more than seven brothers and sisters. Uh, Silver for six and bronze for four or more, four or five. So, like an Olympic medal, they would give this to mothers who'd had a lot of babies. And of course, the parents and children had to be pure German Aryans, free from any diseases or any of the things. And they give you a little, uh, the word asocial, which we saw over in the minorities box now, is defined over here on page 219. Uh, Habitual criminals, tramps and beggars, people that couldn't, like homeless people, basically. People that are addicted to alcohol, alcoholics, prostitutes, women who sell their body for sex, homosexuals, juvenile delinquents, people that would like not go to school and go cause trouble, um, as well as the work shy who didn't want to really have a job or work, almost like hikikomori, like kids and adults in Japan nowadays who stay in their room all the time and never come out. Those kind of things. Um, Okay. Disincentives, in the sense of denying women control over their own bodies in terms of reproduction, took the form of the illegalization of abortion. So I think you guys know what abortion is, but basically you get pregnant if in the first 3 months, I think is the normal period, the first trimester, but I think it's safe for the first 6 months of the pregnancy. A doctor can go in and take the baby out of the mother and she won't give birth. Um, and they made that illegal. You can't do that. You get pregnant, you have to have the kid. Closing down of birth control centers where they would have done education and handed out condoms or the birth control. I don't think we have the birth control pill yet. Do we have the birth control pill in the 30s? I should look that up, but I don't know. Um, yeah, I don't think we do yet. I want to say that's like a 50s or 60s thing. I should know that, but I don't. But contraceptive devices. And so that would be the disincentive. And if you broke those laws or something like, if you're a woman who was a midwife and you knew how to end a pregnancy with other means and you were caught doing it, you could get convicted and sent to jail. Okay. So women in the workplace and the public sphere. How am I doing? Yep, got 8 minutes. Okay. So laws initially restricted the number of females in higher education and employment in the civil service after the age of 35. So they didn't mind if you wanted to be a secretary or something and work at the bureaucracy office, the government office in your town, but by the age of 35, you were supposed to be at home, taking care of the kids and all that stuff. Um, and uh, so they wouldn't probably hire you after that age. And also in higher education, if you wanted to be a teacher and maybe, you were really good at biology or something, but they wanted you to not really be working much after 35 years old. Partly all of this was to make room for men. So if they're not going to hire you to be a secretary, or they'd hire a man to do the job. And so that gave more work to men. Uh, But they came across this weird thing, right? Where all these policies we've been talking about put so many people back to work, that they actually had a labor shortage. So they compromised on their like women shouldn't be working policy and said, okay, well, we need you, so come on in. And it says ideological purity still had to give some ground to economic necessity. In 1933, almost 5 million women were in paid employment outside the home, whereas by 1939, that 5 million women had risen to 7.14 million women because they needed them in the factories, they needed them working because they just didn't have enough men to go around. All right, so that was at the top of 220. Um, They also said that if you wanted to get this loan because you're married, you have to not be working. They dropped that requirement and said, okay. Um, Basically, medical and teaching professionals were the two areas where women could kind of like get a little bit ahead and have a good career, being a teacher, being a nurse, being, in the medical field. Um, No judges, no lawyers. You couldn't be in any of those fields. They weren't really allowed to hold any high public office. Their role in the political system was secondary. Although they did have their own little groups. They mentioned a few there. Basically, they were supposed to hear about the needs of their community or the women or the other people, the old people that weren't necessarily men or active in politics and funnel those concerns to the appropriate men and representatives so they could get policies done. For women belonging to the master race, open the option of collaboration in the very Nazi state that exploited them, uh, that denied them access to political status, deprived them of birth control, underpaid them as wage workers, indoctrinated their children, and finally took their sons and husbands to the front. So this idea that, German women were in this system that did all these bad things to them, but they were supposed to be grateful, they were supposed to be thankful. So, yeah, if you're going to say how they treated women, you know, remember KKK, what that means, the fact that they really wanted them to have babies, and that was really just so they could have more soldiers eventually. Uh, and they were very limited in what they could do outside of the home. Okay, so that brings us to 220, the impact of policies on minorities. That's where I'll pick up in video three, and that will finish us off. The chapter ends on page 227. So I got to do about 6.5 pages in the next video, and we'll finish it off. And I'll probably try to do that tomorrow or the next day. So just see when it gets up, but check this week for sure. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. See you soon. Peace.